stopped it. So the host has stopped my video. So
Well, we tried, Dan.
there you go. So for the next group, I invite everyone to come back, and maybe you'll get a chance to see who's actually delivering this. I'm a 106-year-old. No, just kidding. Kidding.
Far
Lots
from
of,
that.
thanks, Robbie. I appreciate it. So good afternoon, everyone. Glad you could be here. I have a lot of information to cover, not just this week, but also for the following sessions about different topics. Rob said before that I'm passionate about what I do. I love talking about gambling. You know, the New Jersey Council is neither for nor against gambling. We're neutral when it comes to gambling. Our mission is simple. We want to help the family members, the loved ones, and those who struggle with a gambling addiction. And it's always important to remember that the family members and loved ones need that support also, because whether it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, any type of addiction, it impacts the family system. So from a social work perspective, we have to understand that the family system and the impact, and it's far-reaching. We know addiction is biopsychosocial, and we know it has far-reaching implications, not just for the person who struggles, but also for the family. So today we're talking about an area that, especially now with COVID-19, you're starting to see more youth at home, including college students. So we want to talk a little bit today about college and gambling, because that's an at-risk population. Why is that at risk? Because if we know brain development, we understand that the brain, on average, assuming no previous disruption or maybe illicit drug use at an early age that damaged the brain, we understand that the brain finishes developing somewhere in the mid-20s. Now, between male and female, it can differ by a few years, but we'll just say mid-20s. And that last portion is the prefrontal cortex, which is the decision-making piece. So when we're talking about college students and gambling, of course, we're talking somewhere anywhere between, let's just give a year on either side, 17 to 22, let's just say. So brain's still developing, there's been some pruning, but still the decision-making piece is there. It's also a critical age because in the state of New Jersey, as in other states as well around the country, typically legalization of lottery play usually comes in before the legalization of any casino or sports betting. Lottery is about age 18. Sports betting, casino is age 21. As gambling sweeps the nation and states approve it, like Illinois, and as it comes state by state with sports gambling, there are so many facets that people need to understand as to why we need to start looking at gambling as a serious addiction. So today we're going to take a look at gambling from a couple different standpoints. We're going to look at just a little bit of background on a couple of topics of gambling. We're going to see how it impacts college students. And then we're also going to talk about maybe some colleges and universities, some best practices that we've started having conversations with in our state, in New Jersey, about policies and procedures to make the campus a little bit more friendly for people in terms of gambling policy and also recovery resources. One area, I'm going to move quickly today. It's not important that I get through all the slides. I'll give more attention to certain slides than others. I always like that folks can have this to refer back to. So as you're sitting at home or remote or wherever you may find yourself in these coming weeks and months, you can look back at this PowerPoint and feel free to drop me an email. Robbie has my information. I love to connect with people. I love when people ask questions. I love to think. I love to be challenged. It helps us grow personally and professionally so that we can provide the best services for those who need it most. So I love having conversation. Take a look, see what you like, see what you don't like, ask questions that are appropriate for your business or the folks and the population that you serve. So as we look at facts and figures, a couple of just basic fundamental points. The foundation of every addiction is built upon lies. It's the lies we tell ourselves, the lies we tell other people, the lies that circle in our head. You know, Robbie and I were talking about, the coronavirus and being at home. And it's interesting, you know, this will only last a season. This will only last just a brief moment in time. But what's brief is different depending on your perspective and your journey through life. So where I might view 6 to 12 months as relatively brief because of my life circumstances that led me up to this point, someone else might find that to be totally not brief. That's a really long time. And that's fine. There's no right or wrong answer. It's all perspective. And so as we think about what we're going through, imagine someone who's trapped in addiction every day for years and years. It almost seems as if that becomes their life, and it's the lie day in and day out that they're telling themselves. It almost becomes their new reality. And so working with people who struggle with addiction as we know, I'm sure many of you on this call are addictions counselors, it's a yeoman's task. But what's interesting is gambling is the one addiction that's just a little bit different because you don't put something in your body. And we're going to look at that in a little while. A couple other facts and figures. Teen gamblers, 2 to 4 more times more likely to develop a problem. That's because of the developing brain. Fantasy sports, esports, sports betting, they're all on the rise. And something Robbie will be talking about, I believe he said next week, roughly 1 in 5, it's between 17-18%, according to Nancy Petrie in 2002, 1 in 5 disordered gamblers will contemplate or attempt suicide. I believe the 1 in 5 is actually attempt suicide. The contemplation number actually brings it closer to between 40 and 50% when you combine the two. Because for a disordered gambler, they almost think that there's no hope, there's no end in sight. They don't know how they're going to stop, he or she. They just feel that they're worth more dead than alive. And these are all conversations I've had with folks who really struggle and who've been on that fence about taking their own life. The definition of gambling, let's level set ourselves so we're all on the same page here. Risking something of value to win something of value where the outcome is unknown or uncertain. Now notice it's not about money. Gambling is about risking something of value. What's valuable to me may not be valuable to you and vice versa. So it doesn't have to be about money, although most times it is. If you take a look at the chart, gambling and dopamine, it's not about the money. It's the action and the excitement. So if you talk about the generation of dopamine in the brain, dopamine's not released when you expect a loss. There's nothing exciting about that. It's not going to anchor my learning that I'm going to keep doing this thing again where I expect a loss, because dopamine is great at anchoring learning and making us feel good and blocking pain. Those 3 things right there. Instead, dopamine's released when you're expecting or anticipating a win. And so if I have that if I know that every so often I'm going to win something, that feels good. So I'm constantly anticipating a win. The problem is, what makes gambling so unique is that you actually do win every so often. However, you don't know how much, how often, or when. See, those 3 things, that intermittent reward schedule is the hook of gambling. If you learn nothing else today, that intermittent reward schedule is the hook of gambling. And it is why it is so difficult for an individual to give up gambling as a hobby, as a form of entertainment, and then when they start to develop problems with it, because their solution to maybe a deeper problem is maybe a couple hours of gambling where they might be able to erase their problems with a little bit of good luck or good fortune. Every so often, the gambler has been conditioned to win, and they've seen the actual winning. They know it happens because the lights go off and the bells sound, and they see a return on their invested money. But more often than not, the longer you play, the more you're going to lose. Let's also take a look at different types of gamblers. You have social gamblers. Over 90% of gamblers are social gamblers. These are people that have limits. They gamble for fun. It's occasional. They stick to their limits. In other words, it doesn't create a problem in their life. It doesn't create a problem in their relationships. It's a form of entertainment. Many of you on this webinar today, and this is the one thing we lose. We lose a little bit of that physical connection, that emotional intelligence gaining, where I can see your eyesight shaking your head. But many of you may be social gamblers. You've maybe gambled a couple times. You're not preoccupied. You don't think about it too much. But then as you move along the continuum, you have a serious gambler. Someone who gambles regularly, but it's still a hobby. There's still limits. But a serious gambler makes sure to go every week to the racetrack. They make sure they get their sports bets in on a Sunday. They're more serious. It's a serious hobby. Myself, I have been a triathlete now for 18 years, although this year we'll have to see what the world of triathlon looks like with races being canceled. 18 years I've been racing. That's a serious hobby for me. I'm not a passive cyclist. I don't go out for jogs. When I go out, I go for a run. There's a difference in my head between jogging and running. When I go for a bike ride, I just went with my girlfriend, and we went for a nice leisurely bike ride. I have a racing bike. My racing bike doesn't like to go leisurely. It just rolls along at almost 10 miles an hour while she's pedaling on her bike. So I'm a serious hobbyist of a triathlete, whereas she might be more of the social workout, and that's fine. That's the thing I take seriously. It doesn't create problems in my life, but I still have certain things that I need to do. So we see it in other areas of our life as well. A gambler, though, when we go to the third type of gambler, a professional gambler, is an interesting one, because these are the people that get glorified on TV. We watch the poker tournaments, the Phil Ivies of the world, the money makers. They win the poker tournaments. It's a way they earn living. And they'll put that on their resume. Hey, I was a professional gambler from 2008 to 2012. It's an interesting profession. It's one where you're towing the line quite often. And I've always been curious in identifying any research that would highlight professional gamblers and if they do evolve into problem gamblers. Haven't identified any solid research, but that's one thing I'm always interested in learning more of myself. A problem gambler is beginning to have some problems. They might meet some criteria in the DSM-5. We will take a look at the DSM-5 in a little bit. A disordered gambler now has major life problems. They're answering more questions, at least 4 or more questions in the DSM-5. That's a diagnostic manual for addictive disorders in the United States. It is actually just found gambling to be listed as of 2013 in the latest revision. Prior to that, gambling was thought of something, pathological, compulsive, something a little bit less, not an addictive or a related disorder. DSM-5 elevated it to a non-substance related addictive disorder, puts it in the same category as substance addiction. And that was fascinating. And so now there's a legitimacy behind gambling disorder with a diagnostic code so that you can treat someone who also has co-occurring mental health issues, and you can put gambling down as one of the diagnoses. Last type of gambler is an antisocial gambler. These are also called personality gamblers. It's fascinating. They really thrive on manipulation, a blatant disregard of rules, and that's where you tend to see more illegal or criminal activity. Let's take a quick look at the DSM-5. As I mentioned, since 2013, gambling was elevated to gambling disorder. It's consistent with listing of other mental illnesses. It now gives us certainty of language, and it now elevates us for treatment with substance use. What's interesting, any of you that work in a substance use facility, which are probably many, I'm curious if you ask yourself this question: how often do you talk about someone's gambling? And it's kind of hard to do this on a relatively short 1-hour webinar. I did a 6-hour webinar for Rutgers University back when COVID started maybe about 3-4 weeks ago. Right off the bat, we did a 6-hour webinar. And I had fascinating chats and fascinating conversation with people. There were 17 people on the webinar. And it was interesting. Do you ask questions of your clients in recovery from substance use disorder? Do you ask their gambling? And a number of people do not really talk about gambling because the concern was if they do say, yes, I gamble, I've shifted addictions from substance to gambling, well, then what? What do I do now? What is the process? What is the customizable treatment plan? What should I be doing? And sometimes there's just a lack of knowledge about resources in the area. And that's kind of what we're going to be covering over these next 4 sessions that you're here. And hopefully many of you do partake in the other ones as well. Okay. We look at DSM-5, it was moved from an impulse disorder to addiction and related. It's the only non-substance related disorder, as I mentioned before. What's interesting is DSM-5 left gaming disorder in the appendices. So when we talk about internet addiction, gaming addiction, video games, which is something a lot of people are asking questions about, something I'll be touching on in one of the upcoming webinars, the World Health Organization actually named gaming disorder as a formal disorder last year. The World Health Organization, in its International Classification of Diseases, the 11th revision, named gaming as a formal disorder. DSM-5 in 2013 said we don't know if it's a video game problem, if it's an internet problem, if it's a technology addiction. We don't really know what we're trying to quantify, so let's just leave it under review and see what the research shows us in the coming years. It'll be interesting to see what happens to DSM-5 if and when the time comes that they make a revision. Here are the 9 questions in the DSM-5 criteria, and what they're really looking to identify are any of these qualities that have happened in the previous 12-month period. An individual who answers 4 or 5 would be classified as mild gambling disorder, 6 or 7 would be moderate, 8 or 9 would be severe. And here we can see the progressive nature, gambling with increasing amounts of money, irritability or restlessness when attempting to stop, have made repeated efforts to control or reduce unsuccessfully. We have the concept of preoccupation, escape gambling, right, when you're feeling distressed, chasing after losing money going back, lying, which is always a big point that when you have someone who's lying about their activity, lost a relationship, or looking for bailouts for lying on others. And that's the DSM criteria that you can refer back to. Now's a good time to break, and I'll turn it back to Robbie for polling question number 1. Thinking back to the types of gamblers that we just talked about, which type do over 90% of the gamblers fall into?
Yep, and we got the folks answering now. I've been having a problem with my mute button today, Dan, for some reason. We're at 51% and climbing. So thinking back to the types of gamblers, which type do over 90% of the gamblers fall into? A, problem, B, professional, C, social, or D, serious? We're right at 75% now, so we'll give it 10 more seconds or so.
Sounds good.
T minus 5. 3, 2, 1, and here are your results, Dan. It looks like that 91% answered it correctly with social.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
And that was the correct answer. More than 90% of people are social gamblers. Excellent. For those that didn't answer it right, more than 90% of people are social gamblers. There you go. So gambling as a hidden addiction. You know, we talked about it before. You don't see track marks. You don't hear slurred speech. You don't see someone staggering from a gambling addiction. If you give someone a urine sample or a urine screen, they're not going to pee dice or any other gambling apparatus or device or money. There's no positive urine screen. So it's difficult to diagnose. If you don't ask the right questions, you won't get the right answer. And that's true for anything. You know, one of the side notes that what we're starting to find and we're experimenting with in New Jersey, we ask our questions, and one of the easiest questions, it's a 2-question test. It's a screening called the lie bet screening test. And number 1, the question is, have you ever lied to someone important to you about your gambling? And number 2, have you ever felt the need to bet more and more money? So it's interesting, as I was talking with someone in Delaware about this nature of these 2 questions, I thought, are we asking the questions the right way? When we ask someone a question, have you ever lied? It has a negative connotation to it. There's some stigma around admitting the fact that you've lied about something. I wonder, and this is just me pondering out loud and for hopefully planting a seed for you to do the same, instead of saying, have you ever lied about your gambling, how about we change the question, have you always been truthful about your gambling? And then what kind of results do we get to that question? You're asking a very similar, almost identical question from 2 different ways. Have you ever felt the need to bet more and more money? Perhaps we can shift that slightly to say, have you always been responsible with the money you use to gamble? Have you always felt that you've been in control when you gamble? You know, have you always felt as if you've done your gambling responsibly? So kind of shifting the negative to a positive. Really interesting concept. More to come on that in the future webinars. Psychology of gambling, it's a variable ratio payout. You have to keep playing in order to win. Problem is you don't know when you're going to win or how much or how often. So it keeps you hooked. And what's great about gambling, we think back to that dopamine slide, it's the surprise element. That's so addictive. When you get a pleasant surprise, when you open up your mail after work and there's a check that you forgot about that's sitting in the mailbox, wow, that makes you feel really good, puts a smile on your face. But for gambling, the third point also is, as I mentioned before, you don't know how often it's going to occur or when, but it's always the uncertainty that is the hook. Anytime there's that possibility that I'm going to release dopamine, I have that anticipation, the dopamine's building, it feels good, boom, dopamine burst, and now I can do it again. It's intermittent schedule. Why? What are some reasons for disordered gambling? Well, when you think about people who've developed gambling problems over time, some people start, typically females are the escape gamblers. They tend to gamble to escape a situation, a relationship, a problem that they're not comfortable with or they don't know how to deal with. So passive forms of gambling, such as slot machines, scratch-off lottery tickets, those tend to be where you'll find problem or disordered female gamblers. Males, they tend to gamble on things of action in terms of, let's say, sports betting, horse racing, cards, poker, games of skill. That's where you tend to find the male disordered gamblers. But people also gamble. It's interesting. Do people gamble because of an underlying psychological problem or mental health issue? Or does the mental health issue arise out of too much gambling? It's the old chicken and the egg. And there's no right answer. It's on a case-by-case basis. If any of you have ever followed the teachings or the workings of Dr. Mee Lee from ASAM, you'll know his number one rule. He always asks the question, whose client's treatment plan is it? Or whose treatment plan is it? Is it yours or the client's? It's always the client's. And so on a case-by-case basis, some people develop a gambling problem because of an underlying issue. Some people develop an underlying issue because of the gambling, and sometimes they both have a almost immediate onset. So it's an interesting question. There's no right answer, but you always want to kind of think about the chicken and the egg. Another observation, one of the biggest predictors of developing a gambling problem, and even a drinking problem, or drug use for that matter, is not having a negative experience at an early age. So for a gambler, it could be a big win early. If a gambler gambles at an early age and wins, say, a sizable jackpot or a sizable amount of money at an early age, that can be almost something they tuck away and think about. And they'll remember that because physiologically, the body keeps the score. It's a great book by Bessel van der Kolk also, The Body Keeps the Score. And it talks about the body's, how trauma and stress impacts the body. But also your body remembers what the mind tries to forget. And so if it felt really good to have a big win early, you'll tuck that away. And later on, when life is throwing a curveball or throwing some stress, you might turn back to gambling as that way to escape or cope. Now, don't always think of big wins as monetary, because what I've also seen, a big win can be someone who doesn't have a really strong relationship with their parents. Maybe the father is a little standoffish for cultural reasons or just how he was raised. Yet when the father goes to the racetrack, there's a whole different side. He's happy. He hugs, he high fives, he engages with his son or his daughter. That's a big win to a child. When they can see their parent and feel close and connected to their parent, that could be qualified as a big win. So don't just think of the money aspect. Think of also that emotional big win for a child who just wants to bond with a parent who may otherwise not really be available emotionally. Okay? So let's take a look at the vulnerable population of college students. I have a video that I want to show, and it's about a 6-minute video, and it really drives home a good point about a student who went off to school, actually in the Midwest, and that's why I chose this one. Thought it would be very appropriate for Illinois. Take a look at this, and we will talk through this. We can't debrief it, unfortunately. I'm sorry, but take a look at this video.
Almost 10 cents. When we moved in, my birthday is like welcome week. So that was my 18th birthday, and first thing he's like, we gotta go to the casino because you get free play and all this stuff. So I noticed that he was going to the casino a lot, like right when we moved in. I feel like when he meets people, he likes to bring them to the casino. And if they want to go to the casino, he gets excited about that. And he's like, yeah, let's go tomorrow. I'm not even kidding, let's go at 9 a.m. Even if it's like 2 in the morning at the bar or something.
Well, when I was little, my dad would play blackjack with me. He taught me how when I was like 5. And we would always have like little poker games whenever his friends would come over. And he really got me hooked when I was young. I always wanted to go. When I turned 18, I went to bigger. I'm a fan of blackjack and roulette and slot machines. Play poker once in a while. I would go maybe 3 or 4 times a week. I've gone probably 8 times in a week. My limit, I used to have a limit, but not really anymore. I mean, depends if I have any money in my bank account. Yes. Usually I just chase my bets and I start betting a lot to try to recover it. Like half the time it works and half the time I lose a lot. Most I ever won was 2,000, and the most I ever lost was 1,100. When I won the $2,000, I was in the high roller section. I was doing $25 a spin. I put a $100 bill in, and I only went through like $50, and I hit a $2,000 jackpot. We're at Slot Palace, and I'm about to go play virtual blackjack.
About to win some money?
I hope so. We went to Slot Palace for about 10 minutes. I put in $100 and I cashed out with 150, and I'm happy about my $50 win. He would always go throughout my whole childhood. Like wherever, if we travel somewhere, there's got to be a casino nearby, and he taught me how to play everything. Like when I was young, I'm like, wow, I can't wait to play this when I'm older. And my grandpa does too. He lost a lot of money gambling. And my dad's just really out of control. Like when the dealer shuffles the cards, we'll go and play a slot machine. You can't wait for the dealer to shuffle. He pressures me sometimes to go with him, but I don't like going with him. He's not smart when he goes there. It was a fun time. I always wanted to go there, and I really enjoyed the free drinks. You gamble, and I won a little bit of money, but the first night I lost a lot of money. The first night I lost like $800. And when I got back, I was just kind of sick of it. I was happy to take a couple days off, you know.
I think we all try to help him, just like, no, like, do an alternative, like, go somewhere else, or, you know, besides the casino. And, like, when I've gone to the casino with him before, it is a struggle for him, and it's hard for even me to see that. What I've seen him do before, like, will be, like, on the green machine or whatever, let's say, and he won't win, but he'll keep playing, and then he'll put in, like, $100 more, like, and he'll just try to win at least, and then he'll just go right to the cash dispenser and get more money out. He's like, I can't do it, like, I have to get more. So, and I just kind of shake my head.
You need to not spend, but you need to like cycle through $48,000 in a 6-month period, and which is 96,000 points on your card through like playing slot machines or virtual blackjack. And they send me $30 a week for that, plus I get like $20 in food every month and free hotel rooms. Yeah, the Players Club card, it's a good idea for both people. But it keeps you going to that casino exclusively. Like you feel like you're cheating when you go to the casino, you know? Because you build up all those points and all that money. You get like treated like a king there if you do that.
Boston. Yes.
I would say right now I'm addicted. It seems like when I know when to walk away, I don't always know when, obviously. But I feel like when I first go, I have logic, but when I get into it, I get lost, you know. I feel like to stop my addiction when I move away, I think it'll be easy because they've got me trapped with that platinum card. They give me free money all the time, you know. I always go. I would tell viewers watching this that might have a gambling problem that although gambling is a fun activity, you should never go in hopes of making money, because that's how they build those fancy casinos without their customers. I feel like gambling is a fun experience, but you should never do what I do. You shouldn't go like multiple times a week. It's fun once in a while with your friends, but when you go alone, I think you got a problem. When I graduate, I do want to get a job, and I don't plan on gambling after that. I don't want to do it ever again.
So that's a really solid video. That's called Addicted Ryan's Story, if you ever want to find that on YouTube. And, you know, it's interesting when he says, I've gone from logic to loss. I think that's, it's almost logic. He goes into a casino with logic, and when he leaves, when he gets started, he kind of loses that logic. It's a great video to debrief. There's a lot of great points on it. But let's take a look and start diving into some college aspects here, because that's why we're here today. student athlete profile, that's one area within college we have to focus on. Typically student athletes are higher likelihood of being a sports gambler because they're familiar with sports. Whether it's male or female, you're already at a higher likelihood. Typically, a sports gambler will bet on the sports that they're most familiar with, and then they think they have a higher likelihood to pick the right team because they play that sport. So they're familiar with the inner workings, the mechanics, the rules, the players. Maybe some of their mentors, their idols play the same sport. So they typically think that they have improved odds as compared to someone who doesn't follow it. A couple of studies that have been gone on, and I think I cite these on the next screen. 67% of all college students bet on sports. That's 2 out of every 3. And that's pretty simple. You say, wow, that seems high. Listen, March Madness, which we didn't have this year, filling out brackets. Even adults do that. So having 2/3 of college students betting on sports really not that. Started prior to high school. Prior to high school, you enter high school in 9th grade when you're 14 or 15. So now they're learning at an early age. So, gambling is one of those things that's really socially acceptable. It's not socially acceptable to give a 12-year-old a shot of vodka, yet it's socially acceptable to pick March Madness brackets with your son or daughter. So it's interesting when we think about how schools raise money. They don't raise money using drinking contests. They raise money on a horse racing night or a themed casino night because it's good to raise money for the school. 50-50s, tricky trades. These are all gambling elements or behaviors that simulate gambling. We're not doing that with drinking games out of plastic cups. They don't do that to raise money for schools. So gambling is socially acceptable. And I want to be very clear. I'm not against gambling. I'm not for gambling. I lived in a family with gambling problems. And for myself personally, I struggle with a gambling problem for years. And I'm not against gambling in general. It provides jobs. It brings revenue into certain states and cities. It can help improve certain areas, but it also comes with a cost. There's a social and economic cost, and there has to be balance. And what we always ask for is that there should be resources set aside for people who struggle with a gambling problem and for the loved ones. This 2010 study in Nebraska, that's what I was identifying before, you had 35% of males and 10% of females admitting to gambling on sports, which was a direct violation of NCAA rules. 17%, almost 1 out of every 6 male student athletes met at least one of those 9 DSM criteria that we saw in the previous slide. And the 2 top ways that people were gambling was sports betting and poker. Poker is for the cards night and sports betting, which is commonly done. What are the characteristics of a college gambler? We start to see some patterns of behavior. We tend to see that individuals who gamble in college also tend to have higher rates of binge drinking, marijuana or cannabis use, cigarette use, although cigarettes have been on the decline. You can replace that with vaping, which is on the increase, although under this current COVID-19 virus, the coronavirus, I will say that I've seen in New Jersey a number of public service advertisements connecting the vaping with the respiratory and lung issues and urging people to not take up vaping if you're a teenager, because it compromises you and it hurts your respiratory function, which is a large part of this disease, this virus that we're seeing right now. We also found students who had gambled in the past year at higher rates of illicit drug use and unsafe sex after drinking. So there's patterns of behavior. Someone who gambles doesn't just gamble. Usually you'll gamble and drink, you'll gamble and smoke, you gamble and vape. You're gambling, it's connected behaviors, okay? Male college students, according to the National Center for Responsible Gambling, as well as the National Problem Gambling Council, in 2016, male college students are more likely to have gambled more money and reported more problems. Males age 19 to 35 also are the primary player of DFS. DFS is daily fantasy sports. Now, in New Jersey, daily fantasy sports is not considered a form of gambling. It's considered skill-based. Yet you're still able to risk money to win money, and the outcome is uncertain. So it certainly looks and feels like gambling, but legislatively and from a regulatory perspective, it's not considered gambling. We've also noticed that people who play fantasy sports contests, whether it's fantasy football, fantasy baseball, anyone who's participating in these contests on FanDuel or DraftKings, they experience disordered gambling symptoms at a rate of 5%. So there's connected behaviors between gambling and daily fantasy sport. The general population gambling disorder rate is roughly 2%. So when you start seeing multiple ways, multiple forms of action, it kind of elevates the risk of developing or having increasing number of disordered gambling symptoms. So what does a college student gamble on? We talked about briefly here: lottery, sports betting, video games, which is esports, which we will talk about at a future webinar. We're not going to talk too much about that today for the sake of time. I've even seen college students with bottle flipping, cup flipping. They go to the casino like we just watched in the video. They play cards, poker, blackjack, whatever it might be. I even seen, we've had phone calls to our 800 Gambler helpline where college students were playing Uno, and they were doing it as a drinking game, as a gambling game. They do games of skill. Games of skill. You can throw a football. Who can throw a football the farthest? Who can hit the baseball the furthest? You can gamble on anything. You really can. Who can do the most push-ups? Dice, and anything else. Social influences or societal influences. See, this is where gambling gets tricky. If you think back to the video that we just watched, the gentleman with the gambling problem in that video, Ryan, said that his player card has him hooked. And you almost start seeing certain societal influences like marketing matters, right? You start seeing people who are succeeding on the news, maybe the winner of a jackpot, maybe on YouTube. You'll see someone who won a lot of money at a casino. So you're seeing it glamorized and marketed through advertising. But as I mentioned, it's also socially acceptable. It's generally culturally accepted, although there are certain cultures where you'll tend to, it's frowned upon to gamble, especially a Hasidic Jewish culture, a Muslim culture, right? The Muslim religion. There's different cultures and religions that will really frown upon. But does it mean that there's not a problem in that community or in that culture? I don't think so. Because if I use that logic, our 800 Gambler helpline in the last 3 years has never received a phone call from a Spanish-speaking male about his own gambling problem. However, we receive phone calls from the spouse or the grandmother or the grandmother. Never the male themselves, but the spouse or the grandmother will call about the Spanish-speaking male. So if we just went off the fact that we don't get phone calls from Spanish-speaking males, we must say they don't gamble. That's not true. Couldn't be further from the truth. Same thing in the Asian culture. Asian culture, will be thought to bring shame or dishonor into the family if you were to call a general 800 helpline asking for help. So shame and dishonor to the family, they tend to try to solve the problem more within, as opposed to reaching out to a random third party that they don't really know. So there's many different types of societal influences. Motivations for gambling include a form of recreation, social, monetary, a way to cope, and also just to kind of enhance one's life. Let's get through this second polling question now, Robbie. Maybe we'll just give maybe a quick 15 or 20 seconds if that's all right.
Sounds good. Okay, let's get to it. What did the presenter indicate, presenter being Dan, as activities a college student may gamble on? Is it A, sports? Is it B, lottery? I'm sorry, I need to launch this. Is it C, video games? Or is it D, all the above? What did Dan indicate as activities as a college student may gamble on? Is it A, sports? Is it B, lottery? Is it C, video games? Is it D, all the above? Good job, guys. We're at 70%. We're going to shoot through this so Dan can get through his material. T-minus 5 seconds.
And Robbie, what we'll do is, what we do for NADAC is people can submit any questions that don't get answered today. If they submit them to you, I'll take the time and email and respond to every question, and I can send it back to you as a Word document.
No worries. Thank you. Yeah. So, folks, if we're unable to get to you today, we will answer all your questions via email. And it looks like 88% of you got it right. It's D, all the above.
Great. Thanks, Robbie.
Sure.
So going through here, I'm going to skip this. This was a small college in New Jersey, a Stockton University study in 2016, and they were looking to connect gambling and video gaming. I'm going to skip through this because we're going to be talking more about this as we go through the esports workshop. But what I will highlight and mention, a couple of things, especially for Illinois professionals to remember. New Jersey in 2013 legalized internet gambling. In 2018, New Jersey legalized sports betting. So we have a way to place sports bets on a mobile device, on a smartphone, on a tablet, on an iPad, on a laptop. You don't have to go to a brick and mortar establishment to place a sports bet. They average roughly now 86% of all sports wagers in New Jersey are done remotely on an iPhone or on an electronic device. Over 85, it's somewhere between 85 and 88%. Why do I mention that? Our helpline has exploded with people calling with gambling problems pertaining to sports betting. And when Rutgers did a study, as well as Stockton University, they found that the New Jersey average for disordered gambling is 6.3%. The national average is roughly 2%. New Jersey right now is 3 times the national average for disordered gambling. Part of the reason, and this is why it's important to stay on top of gambling as an addiction, is that when you legalize and you bring new forms of gambling, including sports, and if internet gambling is legalized and authorized in the state of Illinois, you're going to see more people with more access, and accessibility is something that can be very dangerous to individuals who don't have prior knowledge or who might be looking for a way to escape a problem they don't know how to deal with. Remember, accessibility can become problematic. So what's the perfect storm to college gambling? Well, this is why we have a vulnerable population. We have age, right? The teen and college years are associated with risk-taking and experimenting. Availability, we just talked about availability with technology. We have acceptability, I mentioned that before, it's a rite of passage. Advertising, and also access to cash. The average college student received 20 to 30 credit card solicitations per year over the last 3 years. That's a lot. So if you think about the 5 A's to the perfect storm of college gambling, I tried to sum it up right there. Esports, I'm not going to talk about esports right now because we're going to be dedicating a whole webinar on esports. Real simple though, esports is competitive video gaming, because it is important for the next polling question, I believe. Esports is competitive video gaming in real time for money. Competitive video gaming in real time. It's a form of sports betting now. And there are actually tournaments going on overseas and while you sleep called League of Legends, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, these video games that teams will play against each other remotely from their own homes, and they're playing for prizes. So esports is competitive video gaming for real money in real time. So as we start looking at the impact of technology on gaming and gambling, we see accessibility as an issue. Again, affordability. You know, it's interesting when you talk about gambling, whether it's video games that we'll talk about in another webinar, or even gambling on a remote phone, you can remain anonymous. That's interesting because hiding behind a computer screen, you don't feel the stigma or the stare of someone looking at you for making a bad decision. You don't feel judged. If you've ever gone to a casino in person and you've played a table game, maybe you did something that was not recognized as being a smart play, you might get yelled at. You might get stared at. But when you're gambling on the internet or in the comfort of your own home, you can escape that and you can be anonymous and you don't have to worry about it. Robbie, let's get to polling question number 3.
Sure. Okay, poll question number 3. And it's a true or false. And it asks, esports was described as competitive video gaming in real time, often for money or for prizes. Is that true or false? Feels like you just said it.
Prizes
right
and money
now.
can be interchangeable if that helps anybody.
Yes. We're already to 70%, 75. And it's true, guys. True.
Very good. Very good. How did we do with the percent on the answer on that one?
91% hit it. It's true.
Very good. Excellent. Yep. So now let's, as we wrap up here the last 7-8 minutes, let's take a look. I mentioned before, gambling is something that people don't do in isolation or in a bubble. There's typically other things going on. So if we're talking about experimenting in college students, it could be substance use. There might be some substance use disorder even. We also have mood disorders, coping with stress, ADHD. Gambling touches on impulsivity, right? Bipolar, mood swings, obsessive compulsive. You know, any co-occurring disorder can be looked at as an area with gambling. Nicotine dependency, cannabis use is a new one that there's new studies. And then, as I mentioned before, the importance of consideration of suicide. I know that's something Robbie will be talking about. So what is the prevalence of comorbid disorders in problem gambling and disordered gambling? Well, 57.5% of people who had either a problem with gambling, so they started to develop severe issues, or they had full-blown disordered gambling. Over 57% of the time, they also had a substance use disorder. 37% of gamblers experiencing problems, also had an anxiety disorder. 60% had nicotine dependency, and 37% also had a mood disorder. So you can almost start seeing some patterns and some connections here. If you're dealing with folks who maybe kind of fall into this category, you might want to ask some questions about, hey, talk to me about your gambling. How much money did you spend last week on lottery? How much do you normally spend? You know, some people don't think of what they do as gambling. I've received many phone calls, and a person will say, I don't gamble, I just play lottery 5 times a week. Well, hold on a second. You do gamble, but they don't think of it as gambling. And when I explain that to them, they say, well, I'm going to lose anyway, so I'm not gambling. If they don't, in their brain, if they don't think they're going to win, they're not gambling. So it's really interesting when the word gambling is thrown about, you almost have to understand your client's definition of gambling before you can even have a conversation about what it really is. What are some warning signs? If we're talking about college students who start to have increasing amounts of debt, missed classes, decreasing academic performance, depression, isolation, interpersonal issues, and then as we mentioned before, alcohol, cannabis, or other substance use. That's Dr. John Grant in the University of Chicago. I love listening to Dr. Grant. I was just with him in Kentucky at the end of January. And you know, he's fascinating because he's been treating problem gamblers for years. And he's over 20 years. And a gambler will come up to him and say, well, I had a problem with gambling. Is it okay if I play a video game now? And Dr. Grant's answer is the same all the time. I don't know. Give it a try. See what happens. Because we don't know, right? The honest answer is we don't know. We can look at studies and we can say, hey, 60% of the time you're also going to have a problem, so you probably shouldn't do that. But what if you're not part of the 60%? What if that thing does not cause a problem in your life? And so we get so quick to say, no, don't do this, don't do that, don't do anything, but we're really not giving a chance. And so it's really interesting when I hear a different perspective to say, I don't know if it'll cause a problem in your life, give it a try. So how do we make college campuses safer? This is important. We've started looking to implement policy in the state of New Jersey around universities and college campuses. Number one, we encourage college campuses to establish a committee. Okay, so start off with a committee and take a look. You know, do you have a policy on gambling on your campus? If not, develop a policy on gambling. You know, review and refine it or integrate it with existing policy on alcohol or substance misuse. What is the policy on alcohol or substance? Because every college campus has one of those. However, we don't have any kind of policy with gambling, either underage or illegal. How about promoting campus-wide events on the dangers or harms surrounding illegal or underage gambling? Also, events during specific times of the year. Last month was March, Problem Gambling Awareness Month. It's nationally recognized. It's a great time to have a conversation, to kind of get some information out. We also ask for campuses to recognize and make reasonable accommodations for students in recovery from gambling, just like with substance use disorder. We also want to ask colleges to include gambling questions on surveys or through health screenings, make resources available at clinicians' offices or counselor offices, and also strengthen counseling services so that there is an internationally certified gambling counselor on each campus. You know, I think that's a wonderful opportunity. As a matter of fact, this Friday, one of my staff members, who is our treatment coordinator, will be doing a 1-hour webinar in New Jersey on the process for becoming an ICGC, which is an internationally recognized certification as a gambling counselor. I would like to extend that invitation to anyone here who's interested on that this Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 a.m., and I can confirm the time, 1-hour webinar for free. If you're interested, get that information over to me. You can send it to Robbie, and I'll make sure you're registered on Zoom. Okay, we'd love if you're interested in learning more about how to become a gambling counselor. So available options vary by state. When I talk about make sure recovery options or resources are available, they should include concepts of the following: a voluntary self-exclusion program. So if someone doesn't want to receive solicitations or marketing material from casinos or racetracks, a person should be able to sign up for that and block themselves. Almost like the do not call list of gambling. Okay, do not call, do not mail, do not disturb, whatever you want to think about. We want to make sure that people have access to community resources, therapeutic community, include individual counseling, and also mutual aid or peer support like Gamblers Anonymous. Just like AA. GA is a fellowship of like-minded people, it's peer support, and it helps strengthen and improve the chances of a sustainable and meaningful long-term recovery. But lastly, responsible gambling. How do we keep it fun? Because we know even college kids, they still want to do it. There could be peer pressure. It could be a form of entertainment. So we just remind people, gamble for fun, not for profit. Set your limits, both time limits and money limits. Spend what you can afford. Don't take the mortgage money. Don't take the car payment. Don't take more money out. Don't go to the ATM and chase your losses. Take frequent breaks. Walk around. You want to come off that dopamine high. You want to level set your body again. You also don't want to have an individual who's consuming drugs excessively or excessive amounts of alcohol while gambling. I always operate off the HALT principle. If someone's hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, they should just stop gambling, because those are basic needs that need to be met first before any form of entertainment. And also know the resources, very important. So I want to just leave you with, 800 Gambler, that's the national hotline. It's in New Jersey. We're also in over 25 other states. 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week helpline, helping both the problem gambler and the loved one, and we provide support, treatment, and hope. Robbie, I want to turn that back to you now as we wrap up here.
Sure.
We have time for Q&A, or if we want to email them out, I'll leave it up to you.
Oh, thank you, Dan. Well, if you got a couple of minutes, there's just a couple of questions.
Sure.
I know, thank you. There was, Megan said that she had a family member who plays, I believe this came over when you were speaking on esports, competitive League of Legends, and it's been interesting to see a perspective on esports gambling. But let's look at.
Yeah, we're going to be covering that, I think, in the wide world of, I think that's coming up in May. We're going to be
One of the Mays. I think we've got you on May 5th and 15th. So Marie asks, what impact is COVID-19 affecting college students in gambling?
So it's kind of early. A great question. We're getting those questions right now. I actually have a conference call tomorrow with Stockton University and Rutgers again to talk about surveys, because one of the things we need is data. This is happening real time. I'm very curious in the impacts. College students, what we're seeing now is we're seeing a shift from the sports betting sites to the poker rooms. So any college student who is 21 gambling legally in the state of New Jersey, we've now, and I can track this through the Division of Gaming Enforcement, we're seeing a shift into the poker rooms. How many hours they're spending and how much money, we need data. And this is where the Survey Monkeys, the real-time data can kind of flow. The trick with gambling is that there's no federal funding for gambling research or data. It's all state funded. And as a private nonprofit, our resources are limited. And we're also concerned about our future funding flow. So it's a real dynamic time, because I want answers to those questions. The problem is, how much money do we spend if we have an uncertain future ahead of us with our funding stream? Great question. I wish I had a better answer, but it's something we're exploring in New Jersey, and I'm curious for myself too.
Okay. Yeah. We don't have the data yet, right? But I agree. Very good question. And that's pretty much all it on the questions. Trinaj, Tamara, send me the information. You guys are wanting the webinar that Dan spoke of on Friday. And by all means, remember here in Illinois too, with the PCGC, everything's, I know speaking with IDHS, they're really promoting the state licensure too, and most of it's for free too. But by all means, any certification you can do to serve this population, we're for. So anyways, thank you for everybody for being on the call. Dan, thanks again, man, and we look forward for your next one. And please, everybody log in for the April 21st call on problem gambling, gambling disorder, and suicide. It's going to be a darker subject matter, but I think one that's relevant in what we do for a living. Okay. Thank you, everyone, again, and everybody stay safe and healthy. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you all. Be safe and look forward to chatting soon. Take care.
No worries. Thank you.
Bye-bye.